Well, my name is Mike Vanderboegh. I'm the founder of the 3% movement, which is a movement. It's an idea. It's not really an organization. We don't keep membership records. We don't ask for dues. The idea is traced back to the Revolutionary War, when 3% of the American populace fought against the king actively in the field. They were supported by perhaps another 10%, and perhaps another 20% cheered them on. Another third of the population was for the king. In fact, by the end of the war, there were more American colonists fighting in the field for the king than against the king. And then the other third were in the middle. They blew with the wind and took what came. The point is that history is made by determined minorities, and that if the 3% could secure their liberties back in 1775, then we can certainly defend the liberties that they gave us in the 21st century. Well, I've been popularizing this idea now for almost 10 years, uh, perhaps more. The, uh, the thing that concerned us most, and this includes the Bush administration, was the militarization of police, the vertical integration of federal, state, and local police, all dancing to a federal tune. Uh, and of course, the surveillance state. You know, there were many people like me who were very critical of Bill Clinton, but after 9/11, we also were extremely critical of George Bush and the Patriot Act, because we understood that, as the founders did, that you should never pass a law that you weren't willing to see your own worst enemy enforce upon you. And that involves a significant amount of trust. We didn't have that trust. We haven't had that trust of the federal government since 1993 in Waco, or the year before with Ruby Ridge. And the increasing militarization of the police under both parties, all administrations, uh, concerned us greatly. And with the coming of Barack Obama, we understood that there was more gun control legislation coming down the pike at some point, and we felt that a line had to be drawn. So the 3% folks say specifically that we will not obey any further restrictions on our traditional rights to arms. And that includes the failed federal legislation that was just attempted to pass, as well as the state laws that have been passed in places like New York, Connecticut, Colorado. 3%ers say quite plainly that we're not going to obey those laws, and we will do anything necessary to deny, defy, to evade, and even smuggle, if that's necessary, in order to flout these laws. Well, first of all, in terms of national security, you have to decide what nation it is you're trying to secure. We are divided into really two peoples. We're divided along the answer to the question, do the people serve the government or does the government serve the people? That's a question that cannot be finessed. It cannot be, the answer cannot be negotiated. It's either one or the other, right? Not necessarily because we're trying to inflict our opinions on other people. All we wish to do is to be left alone with the exercise of our traditional liberties. But I'm afraid that the people who subscribe to the theory that the people should serve the government are, you know, I mean, I call them collectivists. They have decided that their version of the collective is more important. When they talk about security, when they talk about being safe, they're talking about the collective. They're not talking about individual liberty. Individual liberty is something to them that's eminently disposable, because they believe, you know, that they can somehow negotiate or trade liberty for security. And of course, as Franklin said, you know, those who would trade essential liberty for a little temporary safety will have neither liberty nor safety. And we believe that very firmly. You know, if you look at the revelations of Snowden, Snowden has shown us all that the government considers all of our privacy to be expendable in the service of security. But who indeed are they securing? I mean, I've been observing federal law enforcement for many, many years. And I got to tell you, as the guy that one of the guys that originally broke the Fast and Furious story, these are the same people who perpetrated Fast and Furious, and now they're asking us to trust them with, again, more of our essential liberty. And this, of course, bleeds over into the gun issue as well. Why do they wish to disarm me, who is law-abiding, at least, you know, for now, until they change the law? But I'm law-abiding. I've you know, never had a idea of going into a movie theater or God forbid an elementary school and shooting people. And yet their solution to this problem of mass shootings is to disarm me and to disarm my friends. Now, you know, I'm a student of history, and the 20th century, if it shows anything, shows that genocide is always preceded by the disarmament of the target population. And, you know, sometimes it's the population of the dictator's country, and sometimes it's a population of a country that they overrun. But dictators, tyrants, they don't like guns in the hands of the common people. The founders decided differently, and we hold to the founders' view. And if that makes us unpopular, if that makes us somehow suspect, we'll just have to live with that, but we're not giving up our firearms. Many don't, but as I said, with the vertical integration of police, one of the key ways that the feds are able to steer the entire law enforcement community one way or the other is through the use of intelligence. And intelligence comes from things called fusion centers. A fusion center is in a city or a state. Often in some states, there are many fusion centers. And the fusion centers integrate intelligence inputs from all manner of law enforcement. But there's always a Fed watching over it. There's always people who are determining who the dangerous folks are. And we see from Janet Napolitano and the Department of Homeland Security, which has representatives in all fusion centers all across the country. They view veterans, they view Second Amendment activists as a greater threat to their country than jihadis. I mean, if you look at some of the reports, many of these come from quote think tanks like the Southern Poverty Law Center, which we call the Southern Preposterous Lie Center. SPLC has exaggerated the quote unquote right-wing threat for 20 years, and they do it for money. They do it in order to get people to send them money. There's no poverty in the Southern Poverty Law Center. They have hundreds of millions in the bank. And yet the federal government gives SPLC contracts to, quote, orient law enforcement officers at all levels into the, quote, militia threat or the right-wing threat. And all of this is done from a collectivist point of view. So you get police officers at all levels, all across the country, who begin to view people like me as the enemy, as opposed to the true enemies of the people who carry out terrorist bombings and things like that. The other thing I'd like to point out is that organizations like the FBI, like the ATF, use confidential informants and provocateurs, and have for many, many years, and they're able to steer the actions of some of these groups simply by using their informants and their provocateurs. For example, many people don't know this, but the Klan bombers that carried out the bombing in my town, Birmingham, Alabama, in 1963, got their dynamite from an FBI informant, much as the original World Trade Center bombers got help from an FBI informant. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, you know, they expect us to trust them with this digital Stasi state that they're creating, when we know from past experience that they will do literally anything to preserve their bureaucracy. I mean, the prime directive of any bureaucracy is self-preservation, and federal law enforcement is quintessential bureaucracy. So they always circle the wagons. They always lie if they can get away with it. And now they want us to trust them with more and more power, with more and more knowledge. And we don't do it. We won't do it. Well, I recently took a trip up to Connecticut where I gave a speech on the 20th of April on the State House steps. And part of that tour also took me into Massachusetts. It took me into New York. The New York trip was very interesting because I got to meet a lot of local and state New York law enforcement. And a lot of them were oath keepers, and some of them were 3%ers. They didn't wear a patch, but they were 3%ers. And I asked one of them, I said, well, how does that work day to day? And he gave me an anecdote of the guys in his state patrol post. You often have people coming through New York relocating, going to points south, for example, or west, and they're bringing their firearms from places like Maine, coming through New York. And sometimes they don't do the best job of storing them. And a cop that wasn't an oath keeper, a cop that wasn't a 3%er, would arrest these people, as many have been arrested just for transferring weapons across the state of New York. Even though that is perfectly legal, they were still being busted. And he said, well, what we do is if we see a guy with a bunch of rifles in the back of his car, after we've run his license and we know that he doesn't have any wants or warrants, we say, sir, would you mind if I helped you put those in the trunk? And so in that sense, the cops are really engaging in negating the entire thrust of the gun control laws that have been pushed upon them simply by refusing to enforce them. And you see that at different levels in different ways. Everyone who takes an oath to the Constitution well, understand that just because something is legal doesn't mean that police are, especially police supervisors, especially the higher ups that are themselves politicians, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way they want to see the law enforced. Right? And if there is a predisposition to be anti-gun, they will find anything they can to take that person and put him in jail. It's perfectly legal to photograph police in the performance of their duties, but we see that cops are often now turning on people with cell phone cameras and arresting them, seizing the phones, destroying the phones, simply because, well, we're the police and we get to tell you what to do. Well, no, that's not the way the founders envisioned it, certainly. And yet, what's legal and what happens under color of law are two different things. Well, certainly you can't be a 3%er without being an oath keeper, right? And many oath keepers are 3%ers. It's just, but we are separate. It's not a specific identity of interest necessarily. So although people like SPLC like to lump us all in together and conflate us with neo-Nazis and you name it. But ignoring the fact that people like Stuart Rhodes, people like me. I mean, we've been fighting neo-Nazis and the Klan at street level, pretty much all of our lives, and we do it where it costs. If things go badly, we don't go on the Sunday talk shows like Morris Ease or Mark Botak of the Southern Poverty Law Center and mouth words that really mean nothing. In practical terms, we believe in the Constitution of the United States, that it extends to everyone regardless of race, creed, color, or religion. I myself am a Christian libertarian. I believe in God, free men, and free markets. I especially believe that the Second Amendment is the ultimate guarantor of liberty in this country. And that's why I intend to hang on to it until they put me in the ground. Well, I hope so. We'll have to see. We're going to be smuggling some magazines into the state of Colorado later on this year. And after that, we're going to go up to New York and break their laws and see if they're interested in arresting me. So, well, various states have new various limits. Anything over 15 rounds. I think New York. Oh, no. We're talking about, right, right. The 30 rounders you used to pop into the M16A2, and I mean, that's the whole thing about these new laws is they've taken entire classes of people and made criminals of them. People that previously would, never think about breaking a law, but, you craft a law. I mean, if I'm law abiding, I'm standing on the line of the law, and you move the line behind me, I've got a choice. Either I back up or I stand where I am and defy the law. Because as we know from hundreds of years of American jurisprudence, an unconstitutional law is considered null and void. And the rest of the argument will be interesting to see how it comes out, because the other side doesn't concede that point at all. Exactly. Thank you. Yes, now that we've got the technical difficulties all figured out, I'd be happy to do it again.